Well, in continuing our parables, I'm going to go ahead and be doing the rich man and Lazarus. If you see me kind of getting close to my board, trying to read stuff, I got all my notes on there. So,
Ed's taking notes.
Okay.
alright. Okay, so this evening, we're going to be reading from Luke 16, verses 19 through 31. Now, what I want to go over right now is I want to go ahead and talk about who's listening to Jesus. To his parables. So, can I get somebody to read Luke 16, verse 1?
He was also saying to the disciples.
Okay, so from that verse we can tell that the disciples are one of the groups that Jesus is talking to. And then can I get another reader to read Luke 16, verse 14?
The Pharisees who loved money heard all this and were sneering at Jesus.
And then we have the Pharisees. I didn't spell that right, but it's okay. And as it said, the Pharisees who love money. Okay, now that we have established the kind of the groups that Jesus is teaching these parables to, I want you guys to go ahead and tell me what are some alternative interpretations that you've heard about this story.
Okay, I'll start off with, in doing our research and studying and listening, we heard a real interesting one, and Tate's assuming that we all know this parable, which he's going to read, but we know the parable of the rich man Lazarus, but we heard one where a guy said that the rich man represented Israel. Lazarus represented the Jews that believed in Jesus, and the dogs represented Gentiles. And we're not saying that this is, the interpretation. We're just throwing a few things out there. We come across a few different things. I thought that was interesting, if nothing else. It seems to break down when you say the dogs are the Gentiles, because there's no dogs that end up in heaven.
I like that one. Does anybody else have any other thing now that we're kind of got kicked off there?
The other big discussion, debate, different schools of thoughts with people was, there are people that say this is a parable. There are other people that say this is a true story.
That's the one I've heard is this actually a parable? Is this an analogy? Or was this an actual story that Jesus told and made interpretation from there?
That's a good one too. Does anybody else have anything?
One thing to go along with that is, in other parables, nobody is named. But in this parable, we have a name given.
Yeah, we don't just say a man or a poor man or something like that. We actually call him by name. So that is interesting.
And Lazarus, the name, correct me if I'm wrong, it means God
Is with you.
God helps. God helps me. God is. Have y'all heard that? Does that sound right?
But maybe.
Yeah, I've never heard that one yet. Well, David's looking that up. Does anybody else have anything?
Well, I'll throw. Okay, I'm sorry to keep talking, but I'll throw this out too while we're talking about some of these, just these interesting things, these whatever things people come up with. Lazarus, from what one thing I heard read is like another name for Eliezer. Remember Abraham's servant?
Eliezer.
There's a relationship there with those names. And in this parable, Lazarus is in Abraham's bosom. And then this one person was going back and talking about how Abraham at one time said to God, I don't have any offspring to inherit my belongings except my servant, Eliezer. And I don't know where you go with that point or whatever, but there's always that kind of interesting connections and imagery that you get, some of these stories.
Does anybody else have anything?
Well, something I was just looking at here, and I haven't looked at all the parables and thought of it. One thing, at the end of some of Jesus's parables that are kind of those different stories, sometimes he ends the parable and says, and so will my Father do to you. Or he comes back and kind of breaks away to say, this is it. And this one doesn't have anything like that at the end, so it makes it sound like, makes it sound a little more real.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
the name does mean God is helped or whom God helps. And it's also just it is a transliteration of the Hebrew word. So they just took the Hebrew word and in the Greek and just spelled it basically the same way you would in Hebrew. So there's the word Eliezer, which translates to Lazaro or Lazaros in the Greek. So, it's interesting.
One more thing I will mention, and then you can move on. But one of the things that occurred to me is, again, we all know the story, and Tate's going to read it, but Lazarus, at one point, the rich man says, send Lazarus back from the dead. Well, of course, in the Bible, we know Jesus raised a man named Lazarus.
Yeah.
And I've never really heard that connection before. I don't know if anybody's ever tried to put
But
those
it
two
makes you
together.
wonder.
Well, all the studying we did, everyone was, even people who think it was a real story, say no, they don't connect those two people. But there's just very interesting connections there. There's just some really neat, interesting connections.
I would say this is for sure one of the more interesting parables. A lot of more things to dig into further. Alright, well, I guess I'll go ahead and read the chapter to you guys, and then we'll go from there and see what happens. So if you'd like to turn your Bibles with me to Luke 16, and then I'll read verses 19 through 31, which is the end of the chapter. There was a rich man who was dressed in fine linen and purple and lived in luxury every day. At the gate lay a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores, and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. In hell, where he was in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham far away, with Lazarus by his side. So he called to him, Father Abraham, have pity on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water, and cool my tongue, because I'm in agony in this fire. But Abraham replied, Son, remember that in your lifetime you received good things, while Lazarus received bad things? But now he's comforted here, and you're in agony. And besides all this, between us there's a great chasm fixed, so that those who want to cross from here to there cannot, nor can anyone cross from there to us. He answered, Then I beg of you, Father, send Lazarus to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers. Let him warn them, so that they will not also come to this place of torment. Abraham replied, They have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them. No, Father Abraham, he said, but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent. He said to him, if they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not even be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead. Alright, now I have an interesting question for you guys. I want to see if somebody can get it or name it. So in the Bible, directly in that story, where does it say, or what does it say the rich man's sin was?
Does not name a sin, does it? Other than
It
him
doesn't.
just,
So I
he
thought-
lived,
I
he
thought
lived
about-
joyously. I mean, he had everything he needed. I
We
guess.
get the meaning of it in the sense of there's a beggar next to his gate. He didn't help him or offer him food or acknowledge him. But I thought that was interesting that it never specifically says the rich man ignored him or the rich man didn't feed him or something like that. I just had that question for you guys because I thought that was kind of interesting. So I just wanted to see what you guys would come up with. All right. So now with you guys, I want to know, what do you guys take in? What lessons do you get from this parable?
Well, it doesn't specifically say, like you said, Tate, what his sin was, but repeatedly Jesus talks about people showing mercy and taking care of the poor, taking care of the widows. So I think, even though it doesn't say that was his sin, it seems like that's part of what Jesus is trying to teach, is that we are responsible for those outside our gates, even if we don't recognize them, that we have to take care of them.
I connected it with the sheep and the goats, another parable that we just talked about. And so in that parable, the separation is the people who gave cups of water and took care of the poor versus the people who did not. And so it sounds like, the rich man fits with the goats here.
I see a lot of pride in the fact that they say, and what we see in people today, you can show somebody something, but if they don't want to believe it, they don't believe it, because they know better, and they have their mind made up, and it's like, he never listened to anything. He was proud enough of what he thought he knew that he's not gonna listen, even if somebody came back from the dead, he's gonna go, don't believe it, or whatever. So, I see some of that.
That takes me to a point too. Notice whenever he says that even if somebody goes back from the dead, he won't listen to him. Well, we know Lazarus did go back from the dead. People wanted to kill him.
Right.
They didn't listen to him. Jesus rose from the dead, and still think about the number of people that don't believe him. I just thought that was an interesting point there.
And there's another really deep thing in this particular parable about Hades, Abraham's bosom and torment. In the Old Testament, they use the word Sheol, is what that was called. And it's one of the few places in the Bible where we get some sort of glimpse into, okay, my dad died 25 years ago. Where's he been for 25 years? Where's his soul? And so this gives us a little glimpse into the idea that there's a better place in that waiting time, and there's a worse place in that waiting time. But it's not the final judgment. It's not Gehenna, hell, and it's not heaven, but Sheol, Hades, which Abraham's bosom and torment. So it's interesting. That's the reason I think some people want us to maybe say this is more of a story than a parable, because of some of the teaching that's here that we don't see other places. It's one of the few places in the Bible we read about what that particular part of what happens after you die.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Abraham's bosom used as a metaphor for paradise.
Yeah, paradise, right. Yeah.
As we start out in the reading, it talks about the rich man, then it talks about Lazarus. I don't know if any of y'all said this a while ago, but I think the rich man had many, many opportunities where he could have helped Lazarus.
Yeah.
And it talks about it right over here in the, 24. Then he cried out and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus, that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue. He called out Lazarus. He knew who Lazarus was, and he did not try to help him while he was on earth. But boy, he was wanting mercy. He was in pain and suffering. So I think he knew this beggar that sat there at the gate, and I think he went by many times, and he had opportunities, like Joe was talking about, that what we need to be doing. And to me, how many times does Nick go by people and we see they need help and we ignore them, or we don't really, help them like we should? And so, I don't know, it's just, that's one of the good lessons for me, is sometimes, I have opportunities to help other people, and I don't. I think if I don't start doing that, I'll have to answer to God for that.
Tell you that, one of the things that I'm kind of backing up, but we did miss on the alternative, wrong interpretations or whatever, I'll mention it now. A person could easily read this, say, well, the rich go to hell and the poor go to heaven. If you just take this at absolute face value, right, the rich go to hell, the poor, that's not right. We know that's not an accurate reading.
Because the other Lazarus that we read about, who was resurrected by Jesus, was probably a fairly wealthy man. I mean, it never really talks about riches, but he was probably, well off. He wasn't a poor man by any means. So, and that's kind of interesting that it's it's a good point.
I was listening to some guy preach on this today, and I was really struck. The contrast with Lazarus and the rich man. Lazarus, in this story, he has nothing. He has nothing but sores and hunger. And that is it. And I think that's really kind of a picture of how we should be as Christians. In the sense, I'm not necessarily talking bank accounts or things like that, but we have nothing before God. There's nothing in this world tying us down. The rich man in this story, we get the picture, we can see that this life was everything to him. And Lazarus, again, he had nothing, and I really think, you go back previously to the parable, Jesus is teaching you cannot serve two masters. You cannot serve money and God. You'll love one, you'll hate the other. And I think Lazarus really is a representation of how we should be. Again, now I'm not necessarily saying poor, but we have nothing in this world holding us down. And then when you look at their, this is one of the points you're going to make, when you look at the point at which they died, it's interesting.
Yeah, I was going to make that.
Yeah, Lazarus, it says the angels carried him to heaven. And it said the rich man is buried. It's like, how fitting is that? The rich man's end is this earth. This earth was his everything. And that's his ending. He's buried. Well, of course, it goes beyond. We know, talking about being in Hades. But just the difference in those two. And again, I kind of see Lazarus as like a picture of really how we should be. There should be nothing between us and God, anything we love and make an idol out of.
One thing I liked about one of the things that Nick said is, I'm going to make a point after I finish writing this. Okay, so let me find where it's at. Okay, so in verse 21 of Luke 16, it says, "He longed to eat what fell from the rich man's table." So he was longing for just the crumbs, just the scraps that came from there. Well, then we go ahead and go down to, let's see. Then we go down to verse 24 in Luke, and it says, "So he called to him, 'Father Abraham, have pity on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water so he can cool my tongue, for I'm in agony in this flame.'" So Lazarus wanted just a little bit of food. He wanted just the scraps from the rich man's table. And it's kind of like the tables turn whenever now the rich man wants just a little bit of water to help cool him. I think that's interesting, just how it flipped like that. And then another point that I want to make is that in verse 27 through 28, it says, "He answered, then I beg of you, Father, send Lazarus to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers. Let him warn them, so that they will not also come to this place of torment." That's interesting in the sense of, it kind of lets you know how bad hell is. In the sense of, he's asking Abraham to send Lazarus so that his brothers don't end up there. An old saying is that misery loves company. Is that right? Yeah, misery loves company. But you can tell not in hell. In hell it's different. Based off of what the rich man's saying. He doesn't want his brothers to go there and suffer. Does anybody else have any lessons or morals that they get from this story? Yes, Dwight.
I was just thinking further up on your list that both of them were in covenant relationship. Both had the opportunity to be instructed through the law of how to live and how to do. And we are in a covenant relationship. If you're covered by the blood of Christ, you're in a new relationship. We have the gospel, we have the New Testament. We are to learn that and apply it if we are in that covenant relationship. I don't think the rich man was living up to the covenant relationship that he said he was in. And I wonder how often we do not live up to the covenant relationship.
That's a good point.
It is.
Yes.
If any of y'all ever thought about, it's obvious that the rich man did not do what he needed to do. But don't you think probably Lazarus, what he was going through and stuff, he was still a good man. He was kind, he didn't complain and stuff. And it proved that you can have rough times here on this earth, and you still can have the good attitude. And, we've seen it all back in the Old Testament, certain ones that would have things happen to them in their life. And what was the one, the wife said, told her husband, said, "Why don't you just curse God and die?" Well, I don't think Lazarus ever cursed God. I think he was the situation was in was terrible, but I think he tried to have a good attitude where that way, that's why he went to Abraham's bosom. That's why what I catch from the lesson from him.
That's a good point, that no matter what we're going through, we have God with us.
And Tate, there must have been somebody that gave him food and water. He wouldn't have survived.
To survive, yes.
Somebody had given him something. And obviously the rich man didn't do that, but he was a beggar outside of this rich man's gate. Somebody was at least providing something so he could stay alive.
And I think it's really interesting that he asked God to send Lazarus back to talk to his brothers, not an angel or not someone else. The tables are turned here. Lazarus has everything, the rich man has nothing. So, like you said, the tables have turned.
Yeah.
And now the rich man has respect for Lazarus because he's the one that lives the life that God wants us to live, And it's just interesting that it's him that he asked God to send back, to talk to his brothers.
And another thing coming off of that, the rich man in his life on earth was used to having things done for him. in hell, he wanted Lazarus to dip his finger in water. He wanted things done for him in hell too.
Oh, good point.
So it's just kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Good, I don't know if you've mentioned it yet, but along with what David said, and you said it too about, he said send Lazarus back. And you remember the response is, they won't listen, but he said, they have Moses and the prophets. And what do you think we could take from that?
I was just gonna mention that verse 29. You gonna read that again?
Yes, I'll read it again. Abraham replied, "They have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them."
They
So
have,
he knew about that,
Yes.
but what did he do about it? He had the opportunity, but he didn't take advantage.
and I'd say, how does that, what does that mean to us today? Same thing, we have scripture.
Yeah.
We have everything we need to stay out of hell. It's called the Bible.
Yeah.
And we have many opportunities, we do not take them very often.
And there's nothing you can do about it after that. There was a gulf. He couldn't go over there and get someone to go back, or, you know, it's.
He realized that all of his earthly chances were gone. He had blown those. He hadn't done what he was supposed to do while he was here.
Coming off of that, what we do on here on earth obviously determines where we go. But as you hear about the chasm, once you're judged and once you're placed somewhere, you can't switch sides. Does anybody else have any thoughts before we go ahead and close? All right, Nick.
I am resolved
No longer